A final main event draft, talking through some takeaways from Thursday Night Football, Friday Night Football openers, and looking ahead to everything coming tomorrow. Week 1 is right around the corner. This is a special Stealing Bananas on Stealing Signals Airwaves. Let's go. And we are on deck. I'm, of course, Ben Gretsch. He's, of course, Shawn Siegele. We're going to make this pick real quick, and then we're going to do some introductions. Garrett Wilson goes. Tyreek Hill went to 6. We get Saquon at 3, which is something we're going to need to talk a little bit about. Do you want to do a Justin Jefferson team? What are you thinking here?
He's pretty intriguing. I know that you haven't been that high on Amon-Ra. I don't have an Amon-Ra team. I do think it's definitely one of those guys. I think we should take your preference.
We took Chase in one because we were going to do a Jefferson. I don't think you and I have a Jefferson together, do we?
No, let's do it.
I don't mind Amon-Ra either, but I think I'm light on Jefferson from where I'd like to be. So we will go Jefferson. Makes me think you have a decent amount of Jefferson already. Is that right?
You know, I have run incredibly hot on draft slots in the last week. I have an insane number of Breece Hall and Bijan Robinson teams because I kept getting put there, and I'm like, I'm going to take it because you don't always get it. But then it just ended up a lot of Breece and Bijan. So the other thing that has kind of happened there is that, I mean, Ben, my board at wide receiver is different enough than ADP that if I don't take a running back in the first round, then even going pretty extreme 0 RB and like being comfortable with that, my teams have been unbalanced. And so that's something I think is kind of there. So we alluded to it the other day when we worked through our main event. But I think that part has been pretty interesting for me. And now, obviously, I know that Saquon has fallen in some. Monty told me about a draft that he was in where he went 107. I've seen him almost exclusively at 102. That obviously deepens it a little bit, gets us into a range, gets the people at the turn into a range where those draft spots maybe are not as weak as they initially looked. Although
Chase goes 111 here.
I mean, there's still a lot of drama with him. I was in a big draft earlier today where A.J. Brown and Jamar Chase went to the same drafter. And I don't even know how good of a start that actually is. Clearly, those are big names. And if things go well, it's going to be a great team.
Yeah, I mean, Brown goes 12 here. He did have a long touchdown as well. You do get to lock in some points from him as well. I didn't look at exactly what. For those who maybe don't know or wouldn't know or what have you, I've been in Vegas drafting with the ship chasing guys the last couple of days. Shawn, you're not a big drinker. I am, especially after, in August of writing and everything. I've always taken that Vegas trip as like the end of the sprint that is the off season work and the really challenging part of that where, you and I were both writing a ton all the time through August. I'm only there for 2 days. Have a fun couple days. Come back for
when I
the
get
marathon
texts from you during the game,
season.
I'm always like, I wonder what Ben is up to as this text is being fired off.
Yeah, it's usually it's usually definitely you're in Vegas involving some beers or something. But I'm flew back home today. I'm half awake, but we're gonna get through this. We're gonna get through this draft. But I had not checked on all of the scoring. So yeah, Brown 5 for 119 and a TD. I knew it was a long touchdown. I mean, that's a 23-point game you get a lock in, and he goes later here because of the Saquon bump, and Taylor goes 110. I mean, getting an A.J. Brown, Jahmyr Gibbs team, I think I like that. I think that's pretty cool for the draft out of the 112. Much better than how the 112 felt, I think, the rest of draft season.
Yeah, that was actually the 111. The turn drafter went Gibbs McBride and let Chase come back into the second round. So that was, again, interesting because there is some risk with some of those guys. It's also been fascinating, although I think very justified based on what we know big picture. So Rashee Rice doesn't come back to us. He's the
Rice
other interesting one I
goes.
was going to bring up there in a moment. Ben, we can play some of the names that we really like here. Obviously, Trey McBride, someone we've been loading up on.
I think Devon Achan's in play here. What do you like? I mean, yeah, McBride is obviously in play. I'm not pushing us towards Achan. He's just I've seen him go in well into the third, but sometimes he goes this high. I think I've gotten one share of Achan, but I'm fine with not doing a running back here. You were talking through that. I mean, it's usually always McBride for me, but I mean, like a London or whatever, or is there a receiver you really want? What are you thinking?
I don't think receiver. I do think it's McBride or Achan.
Okay. I mean, I'm really open to either of those. I like McBride more, but I have a lot more exposure to McBride. So whatever you want to do.
Yeah, so we'll really rue the day if it ends up that our Justin Jefferson share is on one where Trey McBride goes and has that Travis Kelce-like season. There are other ways to play the running back position and cover Achan's points, but potentially there are other ways to play tight end as well, especially now with the development on Thursday night, where you're going to get a shot at Mark Andrews much later in the draft. And I mean, I've been someone who I basically have 0 shares of Mark Andrews outside of Dynasty, where I have quite a bit because I think he's a fantastic player. The prices or the spots that he has fallen to after the game on Thursday also somewhat baffle me. Now, I have to admit, I haven't taken him. So, you kind of can vote with your picks, right? But that to me seemed like a very clear one-off in a situation where the other thing about it that just makes it very hard to tell is the Ravens are not going to need to pass like that against almost anywhere else. So some of the elements of the pro Andrews thesis came through, and then you got a lot of passes. The fact that they went to Likely, I think, is super fluky. Now, it doesn't mean I don't think Likely's going to have a good season. I think he's going to be good. I think that Zay Flowers is going to be amazing. So do those things, Andrews? They do, but to the point where he's often available in the 5th round. I mean, that makes it an interesting choice there. So you're going to get some depth with him. You're also going to have someone like an Isaiah Likely, where you can grab the points. Plus, maybe that foreshadows something. So we know that the tight end is going to be interesting now. McBride is the next pick. The guy we really loved, Dalton Kincaid, goes a little bit later here in the second.
But like you said, there's a lot of options now at tight end. I mean, it got a really big – that was one of the big things from Thursday Night Football and Friday Night Football. Just the shakeup, really from Thursday Night Football, the shakeup to the tight end position between both Kelce and Andrews, not necessarily looking great. Obviously Likely performing well, as you just talked through, but it has I mean, the drafts we did on Friday down in Vegas, I mean, everything was different at the tight end position, it felt like, which was interesting.
And maybe there's a limit about how much we should say about people who haven't been taken, but I did think it was kind of interesting in that I think you could make a pretty strong argument that Thursday was a bigger concern for Travis Kelce than for Mark Andrews. And he has, mostly held his position, whereas Andrews obviously in free fall.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. And I had a similar one in my Stealing Signals notes where, I mean, I think if you were thinking that the Rashee Rice play was that he could take over that Kelce role, which Sean been talking about on the show since before Rashee Rice had legal issues, and I was making up, those claims that he should be going here in the early second or near the 1-2 turn, right with Puka Nacua, back in like March, based on this idea that he's going to do the Travis Kelce things. And if Kelce's a lot cheaper this year, and we're kind of seeing him as fading out, that Rice is going to be that guy in this offense. It felt like on the opening Thursday. Is that what you're thinking through with the Kelce concerns, that Rice is sort of just, it looked very much in that first game like he's going to be taking over that role to some degree this year?
His dynamism underneath is just off the charts. And then, I think you can look at the Xavier Worthy thing any way you want based on just, what your preconceived notions were. But someone who has that speed, they work into the offense more as the season goes along. Hollywood Brown's not even playing in that game. I thought Isaiah Pacheco looked really good. I've been a long time Pacheco skeptic. He made a couple of plays late where I'm like, okay, now you can see the athleticism translating. It's not just getting a little bit less than what's blocked. He made some nice plays. It doesn't really work for a tight end of Kelsey's age if they also want to hold him back and have him ready for the postseason. It doesn't work for fantasy this year, seemingly. Now, again, Travis Kelce is so good and Patrick Mahomes is so good. You wouldn't feel very comfortable coming out and saying, oh, he's not going to pay off his price.
Yeah, he's still going to be efficient.
It's not one where it's not a target for me.
Yeah, right. He's still going to be efficient. It just seems like the volume's not going to really be there, but he's going to score some touchdowns. He's going to catch some passes, right? Like it's still a very functional passing game. They're going to do some creative stuff, some shovel passes inside the 10 where he's going to get some easy walk-in TDs. We're on the clock. Waddle goes one pick ahead of us. He would have been a really interesting pick there. That leaves like a Debo option for me. There are tight ends that we can consider here, or we could pull up somebody just mentioned. Do you have any strong thoughts here?
Yeah, it's that question of how much additional Pitts do we want. For me, I think it's Pitts, or it would potentially be locking in a score. How are you wanting to play the tight end position tonight?
I'm open. I'm open either way. And the locking in the score thing is fun. I'm right on with you on those two options.
Well, I'm going to have to get my handling of the queue down a little bit, Ben. That was a little bit of a nervous 1 second selection there. But we did have the two guys that we were also considering as the backups. That would have worked fine.
Somebody in the chat just asked with a super chat here, Christopher Davis, thoughts on Green Bay the next 4 weeks without Love. You said to me before the show, if it's only 4 weeks for Love, then that's – so the one thing we get here is we get to lock in, what is it, like a 33-point game, 32 or 33-point game. He also had another touchdown called back in this game.
Because both teams had a player just walking.
Had extra players on the field. But that was, I think, maybe his most impressive play of the game. The stuff that he did after the catch on that first TD, he caught that pass in the seam and then made some moves and got into the end zone. And I was like, man, Jaden Reed's really good. Shawn was right again. And then we saw that happen twice more and actually count. A 70-yard TD reception, a 33-yard TD run. We get 138 receiving yards. We get 33 rushing yards, the two scores. The Love thing is obviously a concern. And while he's out, we may not play a ton of Reed. We may actually think about benching Reed if Malik Willis is just not really a functional passer. But week 1, we get to lock in 30 points, and it does a lot for you to help this to get off to a 1-0 start. We're going to have receiver depth. We should be able to have the flexibility to not use him. And then you think about what we saw last night and how that can play out in the middle and late parts of the season. It's a pretty exciting addition.
Where would you – one of the things that I love – anybody who hasn't to this point, and there are drafts that go later tonight. There are drafts tomorrow morning. I'm certainly not encouraging anybody to, stretch your budget or spend money you don't have to spend. But if you are in the market for some entertainment that is really fun and it fits, your overall needs, drafting after the Thursday and Friday night games is unbelievable because you can take the guys that you like and lock in their points and still draft around it in a way that I don't worry that much that they're going to be people that have Jaden Reed at cheaper prices. I've got Jaden Reed at cheaper prices, but you put together a team that works and you're absolutely fine. The other thing is that when Saquon goes early, when Isaiah Likely goes early, when some of these other guys go early, it pushes down players that you were not able to previously get at new prices. And that part is incredibly fun. Then within the context of all of this, if Jordan Love doesn't get hurt, where would you have had Jaden Reed tonight?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think you'd have to have him over Marvin Harrison. I mean, I don't think people realize how much you're locking in. And that's, I mean, I say over Marvin Harrison, and that's maybe too light, Shawn. I'd be curious your answer to that question. But I started looking, further up the third round, late second, into the middle second, and I'm very comfortable saying I would take him ahead of all those receivers. The Rashee Rice, Puka Nacua range. I mean, the amount of value you get, I used to think that stuff was overplayed. But you kind of got me on how value it can be when you already know that you have this 30-point game. It's huge for week one. It's huge to get you off to a hot start and get a 1-0 record and get a good point, because putting in a 32-point game is going to get us off to a 160-point week in week one. Maybe we won't even go 1-0. Maybe we'll still lose. Who knows? But we're going to have a lot of points for right away, because it really all comes down to how many 30-point games can you get in a week to get to high scores in fantasy football. We got to lock one in. We got to know that we're getting a 30-point game from one spot in our lineup. Really, if you think about fantasy football and like total points over the course of a season, it's how many 30-point games did you get for the season, right? You're trying to get as many of those as you can. And then you have, and the 4 playoff spots in the FFPC are 2 on record and 2 on total points. We're already locking in one of these big boom games, not just 20-point boom game, but a 32-ish point boom game. It's going to be, very valuable. And then you also think about what it means for his scoring going forward, that he looked that dynamic. There was some rotational stuff, that question that Christopher had about all the receivers. I mean, like one guy that looked, unfortunately, like a pretty big concern was Dontavian Wicks. I had some co-managers talking about maybe wanting to drop him for tonight's waiver run because the quarterback position is changing. I made the case that, we don't have you just don't find year 2 receivers who had 2 yards per out run sitting on waivers. But you could maybe make the case because we kind of knew his routes weren't going to be great, but you can maybe make the case because his routes weren't great and he had some drops and didn't look good that he's cuttable at this point. We got to make this pick. We can keep talking through this in a moment, but Debo, DK Metcalf, Devonta Smith, Xavier Worthy goes, and DJ Moore goes. Worthy, another one that locked in, two touchdowns. I think his score was more like 20 points. You've been talking about the tight end position. Andrews is still there in the early 4th. It's possible that he might come all the way back to the 5th. We've seen some crazy stuff. I don't think we have to.
He's almost exclusively come back to our spot here in the drafts that I've been in, which obviously are just a very small subset of that. Ben, I was going to make the pitch for Worthy here. I did get him in the 5th a couple times today. Obviously, he wasn't going to come back to us at the 508 in this caliber of draft room. I kind of like the running back. Are you good?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Kenneth Walker, put him on the board. So Justin Jefferson, Achane, Jaden Reed, Kenneth Walker's our start. We have a few different options at tight end as we send the board back that direction. We'll see what happens. They might go, they might not. But yeah, fun start. And as I was saying though, Shawn, the chat's asking about the different receivers. I mean, I do think it's an issue. I think it's more of an issue for the players that aren't Jaden Reed, basically, right? Like the Jaden Reed dynamism that we saw yesterday. And then the fact that Wicks didn't look good, I think, from a talent perspective and what he did and what he put on tape last year and in the numbers and the 2+ yards per out run, he was the biggest threat to Reed in a way that, like, I think he could have really been a dynamic number 1. And I don't think that's still like out of the question for Dontavian Wicks. He didn't play very much and he had a couple drops. But I don't think Christian Watson looked, whatever. Different things could happen with him, but
any given week, he could do what he did in this game, plus have a 70-yard touchdown. And then, you're thinking similar things about him. Not similar, really, because, again, there's no one who gets open and there's no one with the ball in his hands on their team remotely like Reed.
Right. And that's really what it comes down to. It's clear that Josh Jacobs is not that guy. It's clear. I mean, the tight ends are fascinating. I thought Luke Musgrave might be an interesting year 2 guy. He went higher than Tucker Kraft in the draft. He played more last year. And yet there had been a lot of buzz about Kraft. I know some people were really in on him. Our buddy Mike Leone, I know, was his favorite late round tight end. Kraft played a lot more than Musgrave in this game. It was just outright the tight end to pay attention to for the Packers, which is interesting. But I mean, those guys aren't going to be like major parts of the passing game necessarily. Three targets, 2 catches for Kraft. Musgrave had 2, no catches. But you see this like game play out, and I mean, Dobbs gets his 7 targets, actually leads the team. Reed gets 6, Watson gets 5, Wicks gets 3. There's several other guys, like Jacobs got 3, Emmanuel Wilson got 3, so the backs had 6 total. The 2 tight ends I just mentioned combined for 5. Like, it's a spread situation where 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 guys were targeted multiple times, 7 of those at least 3 times. That is like what we thought coming in, and it is that to a degree. And so how do you get there? You got to be able to do what Jaden Reed does. You got to be able to be that explosive and that dynamic. And you just mentioned Watson can be that guy as well. Or you got to figure out a way to consolidate volume. And that was part of the thesis for Wicks that I think didn't look great in week 1. To me, Dobbs is really a concern, I guess, even though he leads the team in targets here. To get back to that question we were asked about, what happens without Love. Like, you're going to talk about low pass volume for a while. They're going to rotate. They were rotating routes, not just, targets, right? Like, they were doing all sorts of different packages. The first drive, it was 2 tight ends, and the only receivers were Dobbs and Watson. I was like, man, Reed's not even on the field. But then that was just the first, 3 snaps. They get the first down, and then they, shuffle the whole thing. Then they brought in Reed and I believe Wicks and, Bo Melton. It was, a whole those guys all played on the first drive as well in, a different package. And it was just a whole different group out there. And so it's just clear they're going to do a lot of this rotational stuff. So you have to be really dynamic per route. You have to be really efficient after earning the target. And those are the things that, you said, Reed's the only guy on this team. There's nobody that can do what he does.
And I do think you can drop Wicks because I think you're going to be able to pick him up again in 3 weeks. And I don't think that he's done at all. I mean, one of the things is he played a pretty decent amount. So there were some, quietly positive things for him. Some of the catches that were borderline drops were also not ones that Love really put on him.
Right.
I think that,
and he slipped. Everyone was dealing with footing, and he was losing his footing. I mean, anyway.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see. It was. I mean, my point with Josh Jacobs has been that his peripherals, other than the one season, have really been pretty concerning. They were definitely hugely concerning last year. He broke free a couple times late. He had looked like not just a backup, but like a 3rd string back up until that point. They looked much better with Wilson on the field. I think they'll look better when Lloyd is on the field. He's someone I was actually a little bit surprised didn't fall more post-game because I mean, you need to count those big runs, right? But he's not the kind of guy where that's actually his game. With Saquon Barkley doesn't have to have good peripherals because he's a boom player. And so if you're going to get that and he looked fast, you're going to have the offense, which does look like it'll give him touchdowns. I mean, I'm fine with him going in the top 5. That's not what I would use my pick for, but I don't think it's any way unjustified. I think you've got to react to that new information and say, yeah, this looks like a great fit. The offense did look better. I mean, Green Bay's defense probably not one at this point that you get a great test from. It's very different than the Chiefs-Ravens game where you're watching those teams and you're thinking, you've got to keep in mind, these may be the 2 best defenses in the NFL, right? And that's what Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson are dealing with in that game. And they both made some mistakes that in some ways that are unlike them. And yet again, it's against elite defenses. So a lot of positives there. It's probably a little premature to say the Eagles are going to score a ton, but Ben, I think the Eagles are going to score a ton. Devontae Smith is open on every play, and that means that it's hard to account for him to cover A.J. Brown deep, to cover the running game. I mean, there's a lot going on if Jalen Hurts just, doesn't make huge mistakes. He just drops back and does the normal things.
Yeah, I'll be really curious to see how that plays out. One of my big notes on them was because we knew a lot about Kellen Moore coming over there and Kellen Moore's history with play volume and pace and tempo. And I felt like what we saw was even when they struggled early at times, obviously Hurts has the fumbled snap and he throws a pick early and it's like they're making some mistakes early. You saw the pace and the tempo stuff play out throughout the course of this game where it's like they're going to keep their foot on the gas. They're going to keep really putting pressure on, trying to score, trying to be aggressive. That's the stuff we want to see for fantasy. And it did manifest really positively. But I do think there's some scenarios where maybe, I don't know, we'll different game environments that aren't, a close game against another good offense. But we're back up here, Shawn. Andrews did go 502 to a team that seems to be building a unique team out of, some of these fallers, got Kelsey, Henry, and Andrews. We do get Kittle to come all the way back to us at 508. I think that's a really easy pick if you wanted to do that. I'm also open to, a lot of other picks. What are you thinking here?
To not perhaps spoil our 6th rounder, there are a lot more fun plays, but this does seem like very easily the click is probably a tier or two, a tier and a half up from anybody else.
Yeah, for Kittle. Yeah, so we grab George Kittle there. That's one of the interesting things you're talking about is how like the tight end position got shaken up. I would argue that Kittle should be more expensive, but because Kelsey and Andrews fall, but they didn't necessarily fall behind Kittle, and because Likely got pushed up into there, and there's like this numbers game where like, Kittle was now the tight end, 9? And so 7 teams have taken a tight end, and there's always going to be some teams that are just kind of opposed to taking an early tight end, or they're thinking about different things in the later rounds. Kittle winds up sliding into some spots. We got this on Friday as well. We got a late 5th round Kittle in one of our drafts. 509.
You sent me a team that you guys drafted
Kittle.
that was like the ultimate bully tight end team, where I'm like, they just went tight end.
That's right. We did that on Friday with was it Pitts and then Kittle and then Bowers? Yeah, it's it's got 3 really good tight ends, and it's very fun, and I love that team. But it was bizarre to me that Kittle was suddenly. The idea that Kelsey and Andrews could be, I don't know, maybe people are just applying it to Kittle. He's old too, but if they could look poor, that makes Kittle's path to being a top 3 tight end easier, right? Like, and being a real difference maker.
It doesn't make sense. I think exactly what you're saying, where people like these old tight ends who we have attributed greatness to they looked washed. And against great defenses where the defense, the Kansas City Chiefs looked like they just didn't want Mark Andrews to beat them, and they didn't respect those other guys. And they were, the Isaiah Likely long touchdown, there's a decent run to it, but the Chiefs defenders played it really poorly. That play is not a play that happens hardly ever. So again, I think that Andrews is now actually way undervalued, but I would have had George Kittle very even to slightly ahead of Mark Andrews the whole time. I think you have to have George Kittle ahead of Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews right now.
I found the team that we did, Shawn. We started Jamar Chase, Drake London, got Pitts in the late 3rd, Devonta Smith, and then got Kittle Bowers at the 5-6, and then it started hammering running back. Didn't take our wide receiver 4 until the 11th round because we had 3 tight ends. We're flexing tight ends every week, so it's a really different team for us. But it was a lot of fun to do one that was a little bit different than what we've typically done.
Well, I think that the tight ends for Green Bay also not scoring well could have spooked the community a little bit. You didn't get a big game from Goddard, but again, it probably makes the remaining guys more valuable. It's also something where Likely's game reminded us just how massive a good tight end performance can be. And that, even in the sprint portion, right, you get a couple of those, and now your team is in great shape to win the million.
And Goddard wasn't good, and probably is not somebody whose week 1 score you would use. It looks like it was, I think, 9.1, but 5 targets, 4 catches, 31 yards. I did think he was involved, right? Like, I thought it was like somewhat I wouldn't say bullish, but it wasn't like a horrible outcome, in my opinion. Although it seems like your takeaway was that Devonta Smith is open so much that no one else can get the ball. So,
yeah, I mean, you see what you want to see in week 1. And I was going to say that we got Devonta Smith was Rashee Rice and AJ Brown was Xavier Worthy. And yet that's not the way that you get a flip in terms of how those players are valued on their, but again, I mean, there's a huge difference between what AJ Brown has already done in the NFL and what Xavier Worthy has already done in the NFL.
Well, and also Devonta Smith, because AJ Brown's been a 2.5 or better yards per out run player every year of his career. Devonta Smith's been between 1.75 and 2. He's never been above 2 in each of the seasons of his career. And you like to talk about them like they're like equal, like right on par with each other.
That 200-yard championship game is coming for a season. Then look out.
I mean, it would be awesome if that happened, but we are talking about a full half yard better in yards per out run in every season of Brown's
he's competing with AJ Brown.
If
you have to go compete with CeeDee Lamb or Justin Jefferson,
he's competing with AJ Brown. So that's
yeah. But those two guys are good. I mean, that was again like how did the Eagles lose all those games and not score at the end of last year? It's one of the strangest things ever because you had AJ Brown and Devonta Smith.
Yeah. We are. So the chat just mentioned that we have 2 running backs here, and I panicked a little bit because I realized we've drafted too many running backs, Shawn. So this is interesting.
These drafts, I think, are moving into robust running back territory. I was going to ask you, on a team like this, where we've taken 3 non-wide receivers, that make you more or less interested in a guy who's not going to play in week 1, but would otherwise be, around and a half value here. I mean, not from his previous ADP, but where we had him. From his previous ADP.
Are you talking about?
Do you want to take T. Higgins here?
That's who I thought you were talking about. He's such a clear value, but I mean, it's him or your guy. But yeah, no, I would be very open to T. Higgins at this cost for sure. We got Jaden Reed's score locked in. It makes sense. I see what you're saying.
But I have also not ended up with a ton of Bowers.
Go ahead.
Which direction? Bowers?
Yeah. I mean, that's who you want. I think you do have way more Bowers than you're letting on.
Then again, I keep getting like the 3 and the 4. So like he doesn't come back in the late 6. And I'm like, I got to use a little bit of restraint. I can't draft him at 5.
I haven't gotten a ton of Bowers. That we go check Shawn's drafts. He's got 47% Bowers. He just is upset about the other 53% of drafts.
I had like right before the game on Thursday, I had both Worthy and Bowers fall to me in late 6. And I'm like, I've drafted so much Xavier Worthy. I've got to get a Bauer share at this price, well below ADP. And then, Ben, I watched Xavier Worthy. I mean, again, the volume wasn't there, but I mean, could he be a 500-yard, 15-touchdown player this season? I mean, he's obviously going to go above 500 yards too, but the touchdown numbers are going to be crazy.
The volume stuff, I think, was pretty silly that people are focusing on that. I think it was extremely bullish usage from the perspective of what I expressed to you early in the offseason from a concern was that Andy Reid is not necessarily always trusted his rookie receivers early, even though they liked Sky Moore, even though they liked Mecole Hardman. Mecole Hardman played a lot early when Tyreek Hill was out the first few games with an injury. But then as soon as Tyreek came back, even though Hardman was hitting, they scaled him way back. They just stopped using him the rest of the year. So you had, Hardman was the first guy as a round 2 pick. Then Sky Moore as a round 2 pick. Then Rashee Rice last year, who again was hitting all season, efficient, good. And they're not really using him and letting him loose. The difference with Worthy is he brings an element that they don't otherwise have. And maybe like Hollywood Brown could be a bit of a problem, but I don't think that's really going to be the case. Worthy ran the same number of routes as Rashee Rice last night, on Thursday night. Kelsey actually led the team 2 routes higher, but they were, all right in the same range. That was the guys running the routes for Kansas City. And then Justin Watson was out there, not a little bit lower and not much lower. And he's obviously the one that gets pushed aside when Hollywood Brown's back, or it would seem to be that way. I think Worthy, that concern that I had, that you got me to rethink in like May or June, you were like, well, how sure are you that he's not going to play early? Because what if you're wrong about that? Because then it's like he's going to be the focal point of their whole game, like. And this drafter in the 2 hole is just trying to build a really unique team. They also get the T. Higgins value there. You talked about how the different values can be. Kelsey would never come to the 2-3 turn. So to get a McCaffrey, Kelsey is pretty unique. And then you get Andrews on that, who's typically a 2-3 turn pick, but now he's a 4-5 cost. And then you get T. Higgins on that in the late 6th. You get Henry and Drake London in there. That's a very unique build out of the 2 hole. But also there's some cause for concern with some of those players as well. But anyway, back to the Worthy thing.
But as you go through Worthy, I will be right back.
Okay. As he has the seems like Shawn's having an issue with his mic, but as he has the huge game and only gets a few targets, and people are like, well, I need to see more volume than that, or more. He got 3 targets. He got a designed rush attempt, designed work, but also ran a lot of routes, which opened things up for the other guys. We knew that was going to be part of it. He's going to do some wind sprinting, right? But he was very efficient on those plays. And that's one of the things that happens with rookies as well, is when you're good, you get more volume. I know I was just talking about how that didn't really happen for Rice and Mecole Hardman in this offense. But I think where Worthy started week 1, very, very notable in terms of how many routes he was running. And then how he fits schematically is so important. And is like really central to the idea that, and then they did that in the preseason. They had him playing every snap with the first team. It's just clear that he's like, they traded up in the first round to get him. They want him on the field. He's, a chess piece that they need in the lineup. And if he's in the lineup, he's going to get some volume. It's not going to be the most on the team because of the way he's going to be used as a vertical threat. But I basically looked at it like, oh, he got there on four opportunities, 3 targets and 1 rush attempt. And what, you think there's going to be less than that? Like, he's out there on every pass play. This was like the low end volume, and he still managed to give you a 20-point game. What happens when he gets 8 targets in a game, man? What happens when they design 5 touches for him and he gets 3 downfield looks and his actual expected points are solid? Like, yeah, he's going to have some inefficient games too, but it's just, there's going to be air yards. You got Patrick Mahomes. There's going to, I don't know. I couldn't possibly have seen that as a concern. The routes were there. The usage to me was all very bullish, when you know that the usage is typically going to lead to big efficiency for a guy like him in an offense like this. We are almost back up. Hopefully we get, hopefully we get Shawn back here in a moment. We get sniped on Jackson Smith and Jigba there. That's unfortunate. You back?
I'm back. Did we just lose it there?
Yeah, JSN went. I know that drafter. He happens to be a member of the community, we'll say. I think a Stealing Signal sub and Ship Chasing Watcher and all of those things. So I was not optimistic that we'd get JSN through. I think, Shawn, for me, it's probably Roma Dunze at this point. But do you have another pick that you prefer?
No, I think going after our Washington Huskies here is the play. I got so optimistic as I had some technical difficulties and had it up on my phone for a second. I was like, he's getting close. But You knew better. You knew we weren't that one.
Yeah, I was pretty confident he wasn't going to come through. It's kind of a bummer because, I mean, some people might take a Dunze ahead of JSN. Shawn, you and I have been very JSN over at Dunze. But Pat and Pete have been pretty strongly at Dunze over JSN, so we didn't get a lot of JSN. In Vegas, we got multiple shares of a Dunze and continued to just take him over JSN and not really balance that. So would have been nice to get a balanced share here, but JSN does go one pick ahead of us. I got a lot of Roma Dunze. Obviously, really like that talent, John. You and I have talked about him in the offseason. I've gotten a little bit defensive about his profile. I do think he's really good, but I mean, I'm a little more excited about JSN. It's a better, like, we care about the Longview stuff. We care about the college stuff. Yeah, JSN had a rough rookie year, but like his prospect profile is incredibly, incredibly strong. He out-earned Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave and was very, very productive. And I really strongly believe that the usage last year was a big part of why he didn't look great. And everything seems to be pointing to JSN being a centerpiece of this offense. The other day they were talking to DK Metcalf about it, and I tweeted about this. They were talking about how they're going to run a lot, and I thought that was kind of interesting and obviously not great for the JSN thesis if it's going to be a little bit more run focused than we were hoping for. But Metcalf started naming the other guys in the offense that are going to be helpful in the passing game. But he mentioned JSN before Lockett. Like him and Lockett have been a tandem since he was drafted. Since Metcalf's rookie year, they've both been healthy enough that they've been the top 2 target earners in Seattle every season. And the number 3 guy has never gotten more than like 65 targets until JSN last year got like 90, which was still like a meaningful. Everyone thinks he had this like really bad rookie year. I'm like, he just did something that no number 3 has done since DK got drafted. There's small things that he
and Josh Downs were the only 2 effective number 3 receivers in the entire NFL last year. Okay. I mean, effective depending on how you want to look at it, right? But Josh Downs was going to be massively undervalued too until he gets hurt. And so you have that trickiness element there. JSN was not nearly as bad as people think, and he was much better than they realize as a college player. Yeah. And I'm too biased to give you like a take that that isn't just, hugely biased, but the drumbeat for him last year before that wrist injury was so significant, and then this year it's been bigger. I mean, I think he should be going in round 5. So, I mean, the only reason that you don't take him there is because you don't need him on every team. It sounds like you would have been better off if you had taken him in round 5 a couple times.
I would have been, I've been very okay with that. I've had him as the target in a few drafts, and we haven't landed on him on some of the co-managing situations, but that that is what it is. But yeah, I've definitely had him as the guy that I wanted to get, and he's somebody I don't have enough of, and I'm not in love with that fact. But yeah, I mean, just this idea that Metcalf would, after that history with Lockett and Lockett so clearly being the running mate over the last several years, that he would name Jackson Smith and Jigba first, the top of mind, and then Lockett. Like it's a silly thing to make a point about, but for me, it's like, how could he actually, like, if JSN's the afterthought that people want, that his detractors want him to be, then Metcalf's obviously mentioning Lockett and then getting to JSN, but he mentioned like JSN's the dude that's going to be breaking out this year. It's just like very clear in that pass. They're going to need a second name. Metcalf himself, even as a number 1, isn't a super target dominant number 1, right? And so
part of that is a little bit of the thing with like it being a discount version of AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, but when you're competing with Tyler Lockett, it's going to be tough. But still, exactly. I think it's very possible that Jackson Smith and Jigba is the number 1 for them this year.
Right. That's what I was, where I was kind of going with it too. It's like, yeah, I think he probably should be projected to lead the team in targets at this point. Maybe like when you factor in air yards and weighted stats, that Metcalf's opportunity would be more valuable, but just pure targets because of the way he's going to run some of his routes underneath. I mean, I do feel like that's really likely or at least possible. Shawn, we're almost back up again here. Several things we could do But it seems to me like we're kind of coming to a close at receiver soon, and that unless you really want to go somewhere else, what are you thinking?
Well, I mean, at this point, I guess I would sort of expect Lad McConkey to outscore Rome Odunze this season, and he's still available. They're just in very different situations, right? I mean, one of them is competing with DJ Moore and Keenan Allen. The other one is competing with Air. So was that not the direction you were? Who's the?
Well, I mean, you just didn't have to crap on our last pick. I mean, he's on our team. Great clubhouse turmoil. No, he's the guy. I think he's the guy I got the top of my queue. There are a couple veterans that you've put in the queue that I would be open to as well, but probably be Lad. It's up to you.
Yeah, I think that's a fun pick. Obviously, Josh Palmer has gotten very expensive and did some good things last year. He could also have a very nice season. If you get a season that you're excited about putting a guy out there in your lineup every week and you think it's going to be part of the $1 million team, I would think that's probably going to be McConkey.
Yeah. You were talking about Barkley a little bit ago, Shawn. I want to talk about him a little more because something we did talk about was the footing. We know the offense kind of has the advantage when the footing's bad. Barkley makes an incredible play on a wheel route to get his feet down and score on a receiving TD. That was an exciting usage to see that he got a downfield pass. At the same time, I honestly didn't think he got his feet in until I saw the replay, and then I was just shocked at how great of a play it was, which is great. You don't fade awesome stuff, but that's not going to be a huge part of his profile every week. His other two TDs were not goal line or anything like that. They actually did do a lot of tush pushing in this game. He hits on a couple longer runs where they get the running lanes are there. And again, I get back to the footing thing. We saw a lot of that. Ball carriers, Jaden Reed as well. And this is something that you tweeted back to me when I was kind of doing a victory lap for you. You were like, we'll see what happens when he's playing on a field where the defenders aren't all falling down here, can't get their footing. But we saw a lot of runners with the ball seeming like there wasn't a lot of defenders near them and having room to run. A.J. Brown's long catch and run TD, obviously the Reed touchdowns, the Saquon touchdowns as well. I definitely am not trying to discredit the people who've been on Saquon. And I thought he looked really good and will be a good fantasy asset in that the offense also looked good. You talked through like the Eagles are going to score points. I also if I'm being completely honest, other than the points that have already been scored, because this is sort of what I have to do in stealing signals. And I always have to balance the getting told that I'm just being biased or have take lock with what would I actually do in my own league? Would I go trade for him? Would I go pay this new price? And the answer is no. I don't actually think he's going to bury me even. And it's weird to say about a guy who had a 3-touchdown game in week 1, but we know that the vast majority of rushing TDs do come from inside 10 yards. That's why I like to focus on green zone touches. He gets 2 long TD runs. It's not bad that he can do that or that he can catch a long receiving TD, but those are the things that are going to spike at times and then not necessarily always be there. And I do wonder if a little bit of that goes back to the field conditions and some of those things. And that type of breakaway profile has always been there for him, but has been a little less promising the last few years. Do you think the explosiveness and the breakaway profile is going to be all the way back the rest of the year? Or is there, more than just a little bit? It was some of this production not going to reflect the way that his whole season is going to go? Is this a little bit noisy is the way that I would put it? Obviously it's stealing signals. That's kind of where I'm at with it.
Yeah, I'm not scared of him in part because he was already expensive. So this isn't going to be like hitting on a round 5 or 6 guy. And now he's extremely expensive. I wouldn't expect him to pay off a top 5 price. But I also had him ranked a lot lower than that. And it's very easy for me to come off of that ranking and say, I think that my initial ranking was wrong.
Yeah.
And, and it was, for me, it was kind of a fun reminder that I mean, one of the things we talk about a lot is that you can't just take information that you have about one player and apply it to everyone, that the players are different. And one of the things I've talked a lot about in terms of running back profiles, going back to 2013 and the birth of Rotoviz, something we've talked about a lot in the Zero RB countdown list through the years and why you're looking for certain types of things, is that there are different types of profiles that will work. And usually when you're talking about a guy of Saquon's size, you need that broken tackle ability, a lot of tackles, but then don't gain a lot of yards from it at times. And I was trying to remind people, you can't just look at the broken tackles if they're not going anywhere. The flip side is also true, is that if Saquon is essentially a small explosive runner in a big back's body, which is what the stats show for him over the recent past for sure, that still works. If you have the speed, if you're able to create the big plays. And even as I was writing articles saying, I think this guy is a risk, one of the things I would point out is that, the team he just played for and the team he's going to are at opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of what their run blocking grades were like. And just, you watch a game for 5 minutes, you're like, well, they're two different offensive lines. Especially in that circumstance, I think his profile will work. And so the lack of, some of the broken tackle elements, I don't think are problematic. When we are back up, do you have a position that you like here? I've got a player that I've been taking in every single draft because I think he's the next one from this sort of Flowers, Reed, Dell group to show that his overall profile is hugely important. He may not be as perfect a pick on this roster. You still like him?
I don't think anyone's confused, but I know what you're saying. I would still like him. I think it's a wide receiver pick. The running back that's good here is fun, but I don't think we need the running back. So you were kind of cryptically talking about how we already have Justin Jefferson on this team. Jordan Addison is the player that I don't think anyone's confused. That was the one you were referencing. You've obviously shared that optimism about him. On a team that only had four receivers at this point, and two of them are Roman Dunze and Ladd McConkey, and we do kind of know our questionable profiles. And Addison's at a good price, and we got Jefferson at a pretty good price too at 108. It's not like we're saying he has to be a 200 target receiver necessarily. I don't love it, but I'm not out on it. Addison was, I think, pretty clearly the pick there. Somebody in the chat, I just want to mention real quick, this Ball is Life has said, Jaden Reed gets 2 long touchdowns. Nobody says anything. 70 yards on a bus and coverage will look good. Need to be consistent. We weren't drafting Saquon, so his big plays are fluky cannot be the argument. I just want to be really clear that that type of comment is exactly what I was trying to preemptively address. I mentioned that your text to me straight up talked that about with Jaden Reed. I guess I would encourage you to go back and listen to the conversation we just had, because I did acknowledge the Jaden Reed thing. Literally didn't do what you just said that I did. So that's not the argument. That's the point I was trying to do, is tiptoe around. I just want to be clear. That is not what I am saying. If it sounds like that, then I didn't do a good job of it. But that's not the point. And I think you said it very well as well, Shawn, that our initial ranking is wrong. It's easy to see that. I'm definitely intrigued by what Barkley can be for fantasy now. And that was the big conversation. It was like, this guy was a generational prospect coming out. He was second overall in the draft. And now he's finally on a good offense. He's been on bad offense his whole career. Maybe that can just hit in a way that doesn't, the fact that his peripherals have been bad for 3-4 years doesn't really matter. And I mean, that's what I felt like we saw. Like that optimism is certainly plausible. The case I was making is that it's probably somewhere in the middle, and that because my long held belief, because I write ceiling signals and I get these responses, is that people just want the analysis to fit the data, the scoring, the actual fantasy scoring straight up. So he had a 30-point game. So I have to say that he's a 30-point running back for the rest of the season. Like, there's no room for gray area for some people. What's going to happen has to be what has already happened. And yet the one thing that we know is that's not the way that any of this works. What's going to happen is going to be different from what's already happened. And the whole point of me writing Selling Signals is to tell people what I believe is likely to be consistent going forward and what's not, what's signal and what's noise. And so
you're not going to always be right, but
right. There's got to be room to have that conversation, though, without it sounding like we're just take locked. Like, it's just a conversation.
Right. Because, I mean, you've played for 20 years. You watch every game every week, and you've written Stealing Signals for almost a decade. I mean, you're coming in with a lot of background knowledge on how this all works.
We are back up before we can continue this convo a ton. I think, Shawn, I would pull up, unless you have a clear pick here. Guy I just put in the queue isn't going to come back, I don't think, in this room. You might have to refresh.
Yeah, let me check this out. I think I know who you want. I've seen him go very early. I don't think he'll come back. I really like the guy that I have at the top.
Okay, let's take him.
I also think he could could come back.
I think that's the bigger position I need. I think that makes sense. The receiver.
No, let's take your
top.
Let's take your guy. I think he's going to come back. I've got a good feeling about it.
He's one that I had to pass on a couple times this weekend and didn't land on. I was hoping to. I have a lot of the guy we just took, Jaleel McLaughlin. So we'll see. You got a good feeling about it. We'll see what happens.
I don't really know if he'll come back, other than what our ADP tool tells me from what happened just yesterday. The reason I can't tell you, Ben, if he comes back in my drafts is that I take him every time a little before ADP. So I don't know where he would go if I didn't take him.
Sure.
And I'm not that confident in him. But again, this is an area that we did discuss a little bit on the previous show that became really clear to me as I drafted heavily over the last 3 or 4 days. And it's this sort of magical experience to finally get out like every piece of preseason content that you wanted, to have some games, to know you've got some drafts going up, and to actually just draft and enjoy that process. So, I mean, I'm coming off of this high, not the same as having traveled to Vegas and gotten to spend that time with great friends, but a high from drafting. And Ben, one of the things that I think is just so clear is that players who fit in best ball are still pulled up in redraft, even though they don't fit the needs that your redraft team has. And so there are a variety of receivers that I wouldn't feel comfortable with in best ball that are such fantastic picks when you're going to get to watch them for 2 or 3 weeks and you find out, did they hit 75%? Did they hit 25%? Like, where are they? Because the positive thesis is one that you're now playing a guy that is going to help you win a tournament. Maybe you weren't comfortable with that because their floor was so low. And when you're building a best ball team, you cannot take all of those holes. But then we get back over here. I mean, there are some unbelievable opportunities in 2024 redraft ADP. But I drafted a team earlier today. I haven't had a chance to share this with you. It's similar, but subtly different than the one that you mentioned with the tight ends. I had a team that went running back, tight end today. Not sure if I said that right. 3 running backs, 2 tight ends. And then the next 12 selections were 10 wide receivers and 2 quarterbacks. And it was the most fun draft that I have done all year.
Because you were doing something different for once. It's unique, and it is really fun to build the unique stuff. That tight end one, that's how I felt. And then we started taking on these running backs in like 7, 8, 9. We did Javonte and Jalen Warren, and Pete really wanted Zach Moss. And it's like, these are like, we have a lot more like expected volume at running back than you should have on this team as well. And then the way that we were landing that play in the later rounds. It was fun. It was super fun. It is a fun experience to think through a different type of build and how you want to make that team work and what pieces you want to be tying together and interconnecting. We already know all those answers with the normal builds that we do, but when you do a different one, it's like really engaging mentally, right? I mean, it's fun, like you said.
I think it was maybe the second draft I've ever participated in where I had 0 of my 0 RB candidates on the roster when I finished.
Wow.
Well, I guess it depends on if you count the watch list. I did select Dalvin Cook in round 19.
What did you think about Will Shipley? Are you concerned about him at all?
No, because he was out there on a few plays. Am I right? Did I imagine?
No,
that?
he played.
I mean,
no, he played.
He was a difficult draft pick because you had the possibility that he would actually get a touch on one of those plays. If he scores a touchdown on one of those plays where he's out there with Barkley in the red zone, which could have easily happened, then we feel very different about the situation. I actually was pretty excited about it from the perspective of one of the reasons I was not out on him in Dynasty, and I really like him as a handcuff, is that I think that he can do a lot of what Barkley does, but with more flexibility. Now, that sounds absurd after we just watched Barkley look shot out of a cannon, right? But I think the offense will work for the backs. I hope that Barkley stays healthy, completely plays every game now to the end of his contract. If that happens, then Shipley's not going to be in a position to score points. Unfortunately, we saw at the end of the game last night just how often these players get injured. And I think Shipley would immediately fall into, a mid RB2 role.
Yeah, that would be exciting. I wonder if he will get cut in some of these leagues tonight.
I mean, I feel comfortable cutting him on teams I drafted him on.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's not something where, it may sound absurd, but you can pick him, you can watch that game, you can see if he scores, you can cut him, and you can pick him up in a month, and you haven't dramatically changed your thesis. It's still there.
Right.
You just have to be flexible with how you play your team.
And the reason to cut him is you're not going to get any more information tomorrow from him. But if you cut him and you add somebody else, and you're right, and that's the player that has the $300, $400, $800 bid battle, but you got him before week 1, you nail some, whoever that player is, and you want to take that swing, right? I think that makes sense. We are back up. You were right. The guy that you wanted last turn did make it all the way back to us. So we go ahead and select Jerry Jeudy there. Somebody in the chat guessed it right when we were talking about it. $41 million guaranteed this offseason. Similar ADOT, similar targets per route run ranges throughout his career, similar yards per target type efficiency, similar yards per route run type ranges throughout his career to Amari Cooper, who the Browns tried to trade when they tried to acquire Brandon Ayuk, which told you they don't actually think Amari Cooper is quite as good at it, or certainly the number one, as I think fantasy managers do. Again, they traded for Jeudy and gave him a $41 million guarantee. The fact that Jerry Jeudy goes well outside the wide receiver window, it goes 2 rounds behind it, has not made sense to me the whole offseason. Shawn, we started talking about this in May or June, and we were like, he belongs in the wide receiver window with these other veterans, where Hopkins goes and Watson and Hollywood Brown go, and it's sort of the end of the wide receiver window, Jamison Williams. But also, Amari Cooper probably deserves to be going lower in that regard, and they probably should be closer, because there's possibilities where the younger Jerry Jeudy is just, to go back to the Devonta Smith, A.J. Brown analogy we've used 15 times tonight, Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy, maybe Jeudy is the Rice and Amari is just the Xavier Worthy.
And I've made this play before and it hasn't worked. So I don't feel confident in it working this year either, but it's one of these deals where I think you have to put Jerry Jeudy on your rosters and see, because if he hits with the profile that he brings and some of those things that you're talking about, Jerry Jeudy has played with apocalyptically bad quarterback play. It's like if you were Garrett Wilson and you just had Zach Wilson forever, right? The quarterback play has been ridiculously awful, and yet he's still done a lot of interesting things. The Browns seem to think he's pretty good. Now, my biggest concern with Jerry Jeudy is that he's always hurt, right? And you can't help your fantasy managers or your reality team if you're always hurt. When he goes through stretches this year healthy, if Deshaun Watson can play at all, then Jeudy has a real chance to blow up. The problem for Amari Cooper drafters is just that anything that knocks down Jeudy also knocks down Cooper from a price where it hurts you a lot more. Well, not Jerry Jeudy getting injured. That would help Amari Cooper. And that may be the most likely thing that happens.
I am just looking at the board and queue here, Sean. I threw some names into the queue, although you may have been adding names as well. I'm not sure. A few different ways we could go here before it comes all the way back. Commodified Hell goes 1201 there. He's usually the one of that group of rookie backs that we like that you can get to slide a little. I had been thinking that he was probably one to try to push to the 13-14 turn based on who all is available right now and what might be possible for us. But he goes
out of curiosity, DeAndre Hopkins, Tyjae Spears, they go before it gets back to us with McLaughlin. Spears would have been an obvious choice. Would DeAndre Hopkins have also been an obvious choice?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, those are the two guys with Addison. When I mentioned the veterans, when we took McConkey, it was Hollywood Brown and DeAndre Hopkins. Brown went. We took Addison over Hopkins, but I mean, Hopkins to me was like in play around the McConkey pick, frankly. He's not even that hurt. He's one of those guys that fell because he got hurt and then didn't rise again, even though he's like going to play week one. I don't think he's going to be like great in week one. And apparently he is like going to have a sprained MCL like into the season, which could be a problem. But I think he would have been probably a nice pick. Spears for sure. I mean, Spears was the pick even more so than Hopkins alongside Addison for me. But I mentioned when we were on that pick that there's a running back I liked, but we already had two backs. We didn't really need to do that. Bucky Irving does go one pick ahead of us, Sean. And
that's too bad, but it does also sort of clear it up. Is that the case?
I think I know what you mean.
Well, I mean, Caleb Williams is just too enticing here, isn't he?
Well, so I think he's a really good pick here, but we were talking about how let's take Caleb Williams. Let's take Caleb Williams and see what happens. I wasn't going to be able to talk to you about the other play without making it too obvious. I don't think the other play will come back, and I think you might have thought it interesting, but we'll see.
So the other thing that I had noticed over the last sort of 72 hours that I didn't want to jinx is that in addition to the tight ends really falling, is that in the tighter rooms, and that doesn't, I mean, that term may be misleading in that people have the right to draft who they want to draft. If you want to draft 2 early quarterbacks, you should do that. I've been in rooms the last 72 hours where people were drafting 3 early quarterbacks, and very clearly that is not the way to play it. I've also been in rooms where just everybody was looking at each other and saying, we're not going to pick a QB. They're just going to fall and fall and fall. And I mean, consistently getting impact quarterbacks 2 and 3 rounds below what their FFPC redraft ADP has been. So not like contrasting with a different format, but what their ADP in this contest has been, like 2 and 3 rounds later. I'm very nervous about Caleb Williams, and that's one of the reasons I am nervous about Odunze as well. And yet, on a team where we have Odunze, I mean, if he is worth that pick, then Caleb Williams is worth a pick much earlier than this.
That's a great point. Yeah, I think As soon as we took Caleb, I was thinking that as well. And I think that's a really strong point that of all the Bears receivers, the one that makes you want to stack Caleb the most is the Adunze pick. As soon as Adunze is on your roster, it's like, well, I should probably take Caleb. I don't think you have to do that every time, but if Adunze's a hit, Caleb Williams is going to be a hit, man. Like they're going to grow together in that way. Then you're talking about the Stroud-Nico thing from last year, something like that. But in a scenario where you're still probably getting something out of Keenan Allen or DJ Moore, those guys aren't going to be complete zeros. And so Caleb Williams, in addition to the fact that Shawn had been talking the whole offseason, he's going to run more than people think. That's something you said to me early on when I went through the projection process. I was shocked how many rushing TDs he had in college. All 3 years, even when he was the part-time QB, he had like 6. Last 2 years, he had 10 plus. He had one in the preseason. This is a guy that is gonna add fantasy points with his legs more than people think. I think people are like
candidate to lead the position.
Yeah, right. That kind of stuff. Exactly. And I don't think people are. I was just gonna say, I think they're like, yeah, he's like Mahomes. He's a little bit of mobility. It's like, no, he's like he could outrush Jane Daniels potentially. Like I don't think people have thought through that part of it. So I've had him as a clear target to get him, right. If you lose Daniels, I've been telling the Stealing Signal Sub, if in your home leagues where Daniels is really cheap, he's a clear target. But if you lose Daniels, immediately it's just, okay, the fallback is Caleb Williams. And then if you also lose him, then I would be to Trevor Lawrence, who's a guy that I've talked about liking with you a lot, Shawn, as well. But it was a very ordinal thing there where it's like Daniels is the mid-round target, and then it's Caleb, and then you can get to the other guys. But Caleb, in this draft, Shawn, we get him 3 full rounds behind Daniels. I mean, a really, really big discount, and we have him stacked up. Could be a really valuable pick. I do really like that call.
And it's something where, if you're going to do, you think about later tonight or tomorrow morning, you're going to do 2 or 3 Fantasy Pros drafts. If you're thinking about how you might set it up for yourself next year, if you don't have just the one target, which again, I think if you have one target and you think that guy is the clear value by ADP by multiple rounds, don't be afraid to go after it. But I mean, Anthony Richardson goes in round 8 here. I think he went in round 11 in one. In individual drafts, Jaden Daniels has gone really late. I got Joe Burrow really late and still kind of regretted it because the Cincinnati Bengals are an incredible mess right now.
This is going to be
Dak
a late
Prescott.
round QB.
How's Dak Prescott going behind Joe Burrow when you think about where the two teams are heading into week 1? And I say that as someone who thinks, I would always have had a pretty big gap between Joe Burrow and Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott has been a guy you could get fantastic prices on. CJ Stroud goes here in 6. He's been in 9 in some drafts. So if you look for those specific opportunities, you can end up with great prices on your QB portfolio.
Yeah, I think this was a late round QB year that I didn't really think through enough. And we got a lot of Stroud early, and I know you were like, don't really want to take Stroud on every single team. Wish I would have listened to that more. That would have been one of the big things that I was talking to Pat and Pete a little bit about in Vegas, and it never really happened because our last draft, we ended up waiting until like the 14th, and we got Purdy, and then we took Fields and Drake May. And like that kind of a thing is like, we did stuff like that last year, Shawn, with like the Sam Howell picks, like just 3 late. But you can do it this year with Justin Fields, who's now going to start, and Drake May, who looks like he's got a real dynamic upside case. And I think is probably going to start in the first 5 or so weeks based on the way Brissett looked in preseason. Okay, so the guy I wanted to take came all the way back. It did happen. I don't know if you have another pick you really like, but we were talking through how the Josh Jacobs not looking great thing looked really positive for Marshawn Lloyd, actually, even though he didn't play. Is that a move you'd be open to?
It is. I do wonder if he's somebody else that you're going to draft. We're not going to get new information. You're going to have a couple of weeks where their offense picks up no first downs. You're going to cut. You're going to pick up later. But, I don't think that the cost here in a different player is enough to emphasize that scenario.
Yeah.
And I just
I mean, we get a huge
Their other
discount.
backs don't have the kind of explosive. I mean, Marshawn Lloyd, when he's out there, if it's just anything like what he was in college, and maybe it won't be, right? Because he is hurt. And so these guys who are rookies, I mean, Marshawn Lloyd already had some weird red flags, and his college teams didn't really want to play him. But this guy is absolutely electric. The contrast out on the field on a per play basis between him and their other backs should be pretty stark.
And so we have a Justin Jefferson, Devon Achane, Jaden Reed, Kenneth Walker, George Kittle, Brock Bowers, Roma Dunze, Ladd McConkey, Jordan Addison, Jaleel McLaughlin, Jerry Jeudy, Caleb Williams, Marshawn Lloyd build through 13 rounds. Jordan Love did go off at the 13:02. Dontavian Wicks was the 12:11 for that drafter. They'd taken Christian Watson earlier. This is the drafter that in the early rounds was taking the value on Kelsey, on Andrews, on Higgins. Take a little bit of value on Wicks. I was talking about Wicks being cuttable. He still goes in the 12th round here. Love, obviously a value at that point, but going to miss some time as well. It's going to be a very unique build out of the two whole, but also maybe sacrificing a lot of projected points at this point as well. It's interesting. And, in the chat, they're talking about Marshawn Lloyd was their RB1 in the class. One of the things I like to always emphasize at this point, I mean, yeah, he's going to miss week 1, but he was a day 2 back. And we get him after Braylon Allen, a day 3 back, Bucky Irving, a day 3 back, Kamani Vidal, a day 3 back, Ray Davis, a day 3 back. Was Jalen Wright day 3 as well? Jalen Wright, a day 3 back. I mean, several running backs that went in later into round 4, round 5, into round 6. And we have a round 3 guy. Draft capital is pretty important, and there's kind of a cutoff there as well, where the guys that go in, day 2 do have meaningfully more locked-in opportunity. The guy, I love Kamani Vidal as much as anyone, but there's scenarios where he's just not that involved, frankly, because he's this round 6 guy. That's probably not going to happen with Lloyd. They've talked about him in a lot of big ways. It's exciting to get him onto another team here. The price never rebounded in the way that I think very clearly should have.
When you say that you like Vidal as much as anybody, you mean more than almost everyone.
Yeah,
I think that J.K. Dobbins is going to be one of the more fascinating players to watch on Sunday.
That would be I would put him on a list of, what am I looking for tomorrow? He would be one of the biggest ones. I'm really excited to see him as well. And Shawn, I think he's going to look good. I'm not expecting J.K. Dobbins to look really, really bad or anything. I just will wonder, how long he's going to be able to sustain it and all of those things, which is just one of the unfortunate realities. We are on deck here. Jalen McMillan goes, UW guy that really is more your guy at this point. He is off the board. You've taken a lot of Jalen.
I have him probably at 85% in redraft.
Wow.
Because, you just watch it for a few weeks and see if he's going to make inroads on those starters. Like, he might, and if he doesn't, pick up somebody else. I don't think that we're so strong at receiver that we would move off of receiver on this pick if he had been there, or if you have somebody you like. I don't know that there's a receiver that justifies this pick. There is one more interesting running back play. There's also the possibility. So I think that Caleb Williams has a chance to be like QB3, QB4. I also think that maybe there are going to be times in the season where you prefer to start Brock Purdy. So we could put those two guys together if you wanted.
I'd be okay with that. But I think we could also do a later round QB2 and be fine.
Is your preference the top guy in the queue?
Yeah, the top running back. That's the back. Yeah. So we'd say Tyron Tracy. That was the other rookie running back that was available. Now our RB5. So we have Achane, we have Kenneth Walker, Jaleel McLaughlin. McLaughlin is going to be a pretty stable. People were asking questions about him in the chat. And sort of saying they didn't prioritize standalone value and didn't think he had a real extreme upside. Shawn, we just think this backfield has so much high value touch upside that there is more upside than even in like a limited role, that it would be a very unique limited role. Even they were talking about like 7 to 10 rush attempts and like, 2 to 4 targets or something, as if that was bad. And I was sitting there going, I mean, that's if he gets that, and he's an explosive player as well, you get the efficiency element, you get some receptions. He's going to get usage inside the 10. They do a lot of that. With their backs in general, but they used him there specifically. He had some, decent TD rate last year. Anyway, that there is, he's one of those, like, I can understand why in general, like 8 carries and 3 targets might not seem like the best workload. But when you're talking about the Broncos backfield specifically and an efficiency player like McLaughlin, it's just not the same 8 carries and 3 targets as virtually any other back. It's just a better version of that than virtually any other player that is getting that type of role. It's more like when Tony Pollard was in Dallas or something, and we were playing him behind Zeke. And then the other scenario is, well, what if he does get more work? There are ways. It doesn't have to be the full 80% snap share, but in a backfield, it's going to generate as much value as these guys are. If he gets to 55% for a while or 60% for a while, that could be massive. That could be really, really huge.
Yeah, and the pie, in all likelihood, there are no certainties, but in all likelihood, it will be meaningfully larger than that Zeke Pollard pie was, even when, Elliott was a little bit better. The other thing here is that you don't have to think about the players as being exact one-for-one swaps or representations. Obviously, one huge difference between Alvin Kamara and Jaleel McLaughlin is that, Kamara is actually a pretty sizable back, whereas McLaughlin is not. You don't necessarily need to look at the massive 2017 season where both of those guys are basically RB1s, where Kamara is a high-end RB1. But one of the concerns that I have for Javonte Williams, who remains probably my highest drafted, the spot that if I am loaded at receiver, that I will make that transition to running back is exactly where Javonte Williams is, and partly because of him. Even with that as the thesis for a player that you would either start making RB picks or you'd be willing to take a detour and then add still Jameson Williams and Jordan Addison. Jameson Williams went early in this draft, which was kind of heartbreaking for me. We missed JSN by a pick. We missed Jameson Williams by a couple of picks. Williams tends to go later than that. He has gotten even more buzz in the last couple of days, which has moved him up again. Jameson Williams is set to be the Lions version of Xavier Worthy with a slower start, but with more experience. So there are, positives and negatives that probably don't wash. You obviously would rather have Xavier Worthy, but Jameson Williams is set up to potentially have a massive season. Anyway, you kind of work through, what those guys are and where you see the value. But there's a potential in this offense that McLaughlin is basically Alvin Kamara and Javonte Williams is basically Mark Ingram, which Javonte Williams could still easily pay off at his price if he's just Mark Ingram. Mark Ingram had a lot of very playable fantasy seasons, but in that case, you would prefer to actually have McLaughlin as the guy on your roster.
Yeah, and then I was just going to say, as we were talking through him, the way that he has a very clear startability to me behind Shannon Walker makes the Lloyd and Tracy picks really interesting, because those guys are the types that, if they hit, they're going to hit in a way that they're just fantastic, but they also probably have a little bit of a lower floor for a period of time. I would probably argue that's not entirely true for Lloyd, but that his floor is not as low. But I like that layering of those different running backs that, we now have 5 backs that I think work really well and gives us the depth that we need. We are almost back up. I think there's some really interesting wide receiver plays here. I like the guy that you have at the top. I just moved one up, at least on my window. I don't know if you'll see it, but you had him in the queue as well. I would take him second before the guy you previously had second, if that makes sense. Unless you wanted to take him first. I could see taking him, it would be between the top 2 for me. Or what is the top 2 now?
Yes. So I like those plays. I was going to ask you, we've got 2 tight ends. I thought I had put your guy in the queue.
We don't need to take him.
You don't need to take him?
No, okay. Not my guy.
You'd rather the receiver there?
Or you put a QB in the queue that I would take too, if you want to take him now.
Oh, I gotcha. Well, I frittered it down to the end there. Marvin Mims is another player where, again, I think that he ended up being someone who has a ton of risk for your best ball roster. When you're at this range of a redraft draft, put him on every team, watch him play for a couple of weeks, and cut him. But there is a scenario where he doesn't just lead the Denver Broncos, but he leads and no one else is close, and they're manufacturing him touchdown types of touches. That's one of the things.
Jameson Worthy and Xavier Worthy. He's the Jameson Williams and Xavier Worthy of the Broncos is the scenario.
Exactly. And you think back to that first preseason game where there was all the discussion of, he's playing behind Tim Patrick. Well, who did they scheme the red zone touchdown pass to? Right. That doesn't mean that's going to be something that happens again in the regular season. But I think that you want to get a sense of actually how he is deployed. There are a variety of guys where actually I think that week 1 is going to be just as misleading as the preseason. And so you're going to get all of this amazing information over the next, 48, 72 hours, what have you. You're going to get stealing signals, which is going to be the best piece on all of that. People are going to work through what actually happened in these games, the number of snaps people played, the number of routes that receivers ran. And as you work through weeks 2, weeks 3, weeks 4, especially the young players, but even beyond that, and then again, especially in offenses where you have a young quarterback or you have a new offensive coordinator, there's going to be so much change. For me, Marvin Mims is somebody that may apply to, and at the same time, like if I'm wrong on him, I won't have a problem cutting him, but I do want to see what these first couple of weeks have to offer.
Yeah, everything panned out very favorably for him.
It's not going to be a huge number of touches or a huge additional value during the season, but you mentioned that Worthy, Jameson Williams, Jaden Reed type of connection. Maybe it's only a matter of they have gotten their rushing touchdown for Reed and for Worthy, and all you're really doing by drafting them right now is banking those points. As you outlined at the beginning, that's actually extremely helpful. But even if they don't get additional rushing scores, the fact that someone like a Jameson Williams can take that exact same play that Jaden Reed and Xavier Worthy scored on, and he has a similar deal where he comes around that edge, he sees the hole, and just no one can get the angle because he's that fast. And it doesn't just apply to the manufactured rushing touches, though. I mean, one of the things I think about for Jaden Reed compared to those other 3 guys, and maybe it's just, trying to come to terms with the fact that there's been an injury. Now, thankfully, it wasn't like the Aaron Rodgers injury, but you're so excited about Reed, and then, now you're going to have terrible quarterback play. But one of the things that you think to yourself is, this is a guy who is dynamic with the ball in his hands. Those types of players on other rosters are also valuable, even if it's not a handoff, but an underneath touch that can go for 60 yards. It's not that those plays are going to pop every week, and they'll, people can point out, the fantasy points over expected are not going to be stable for these guys. Don't go chase a bunch of players who scored long touchdowns. You want to understand the overall profile, because again, applying the exact same reasoning or the exact same stats to every player is going to make you worse, right? You need to know what these guys have done in the past, how deserving they are of additional touches, how likely they are to score long touchdowns based on their speed and their playmaking ability. All of those things in context is going to help you a lot more than simply thinking fade efficiency.
Yeah, I think that was really well said. Justin Fields does go We are back on the clock. I don't have any strong pick here. Fields was the guy that I was kind of alluding to, but it's not the end of the world that we didn't get him because I think we're really, really high on Caleb and playing Caleb. I don't think you have to. Fields makes a lot of sense when you have like a boring starter. Caleb's already a pretty exciting starter. What are you thinking here?
Well, we could add a boring starter to back Williams up and kind of have that balance. We could go for the top receiver there. We could go for the tight end who might have a massive target share because they don't have anybody.
I'm good with the receiver tight end options. Let's push QB. Whatever one you want on those. Okay, we took Tolbert. He was a guy that I wanted. I would have been fine with your tight end as well. Oh, I see which QB you're talking about. I thought there were several there, and I didn't know which one you necessarily were referring to. Because, this one works too. Like, it's not really as solid. My guy, Juwan Johnson, goes there. We decided to let him go. We have Kittle and Bowers. I have so much Johnson. We don't need him on every single team. This is a team that was a little bit thinner at receiver. Someone in the chat just showed up recently, wanted to see the whole roster. So we went Justin Jefferson, Devon Achane, Jaden Reed, Kenneth Walker, George Kittle, Brock Bowers, 2-2-2 through 6 rounds. Rome Odunze, Ladd McConkey, Jordan Addison, Jaleel McLaughlin, Jerry Jeudy, Caleb Williams, Marshawn Lloyd, Tyrone Tracy, Marvin Mims, and Tolbert. We only had Jefferson and Reed in the first 6 rounds. We do have a probable flex tight end as well. And then Odunze and Ladd are our 3 and 4. Addison, Jeudy. I like getting them. If Mims or Tolbert hits, like you said, we can cut them both. These are guys we want to see the first month on, and Tolbert maybe only the first 2 games. But I want to see it because there's a potential upside case for both of those guys, which we've talked to a lot. If they hit, they matter for this build because we don't have a ton of depth at receiver. So I like those picks a lot. I think we did that turn right, actually. Even like losing Fields there, a little bit of a bummer. I think Mims and Tolbert was a really helpful turn for this build, personally.
And one of the things I was looking at there is I do think that Mims would have come back. My experience in the drafts is that he comes back. The ADP from yesterday suggested he comes back, but he was such a good fit that after we had gone back off of receiver for 3 straight rounds, he seemed like a pretty crucial piece.
We got some guys in the chat that are just very, very certain of things. Always tilts me. I don't really care if I'm thought of as having sort of thin skin or whatever. If you don't understand how we play, like, go watch a different show. I swear to God, I just don't even care at this point. It's fine. You don't like the picks. We got it. You said it like 17 different ways. Move on. Other people trying to enjoy the show. I liked the other option you floated, Shawn. If he makes it back, well, both of the options. The guy I put in the queue doesn't make as much sense. I don't know. Oh, man. You would never do Sam Darnold on this team, would you? When we took both Jefferson and Addison?
I was going to jokingly ask you if that was a pick you wanted to make.
Well, I just want to add Nick Mullins like week 4. Have him be our backup QB.
Yeah. It's let's pass aggressively on every play. The weird thing for me with Darnold is I think that he can be kind of that version of Tua, but a couple points per game less. Where, the weird thing about Tua is that you have Tyreek Hill on this historic pace, and you're trying to find other quarterbacks to put in the lineup. I think that you're going to get that, but worse from Sam Darnold, even in a little bit of a best case scenario.
Yeah. I do just want to comment real quick to the chat. I did put the one person in timeout. We're going to be doing a live stream tomorrow night on Sunday night after the games, and we're going to be doing that every Sunday. I will say that these live streams for me, like what I want to see in the comments are people that care about mine and Sean's opinions and want to interact and have useful like additive commentary. Let's make our pick real quick before I finish this point. I think either of the top two guys in the queue are the ones that make sense. Right? Unless you want to go to like the kicker that you added.
Yeah, let's get this guy here in.
Okay. I like that. Yeah.
If nothing else, see what he does week one. Other teams from, I mean, Mike Gesicki's not going to blow up. He's drawn no targets over multiple years now, but I mean, they have nobody.
They have nobody this week one. I think that's a great look. But yeah, just to finish the thought, I'm going to be a lot more aggressive than maybe like Pete or some other people at just like removing people from the comments. Not because I like, obviously, whatever, I have thin skin. I really, that doesn't bother me to be classified that way if that's the case. But there are people that seem to just want to try to get a rile out of content people. It's not even that part of it. It's that I think it detracts from all the other commenters. It just creates an environment where the good comments are being missed, and the people that actually want to engage with the show and have a meaningful, high-level conversation. And I want to have those conversations with our viewers. So that isn't even something I talked to Shawn about, but I have thought about it a lot. And the people that are just like commenting over and over again points that are not really fitting with the point of the show, and they just want to make their opinion heard. I want you guys to be able to comment whatever you want to comment, as long as it's a genuine opinion and a genuine take. But I'm not going to just let that detract from other potential commenters. So just something to keep in mind as we do that throughout the season this year. That's going to be my approach on it. Again, I didn't even talk to Shawn about that, but I want the comments and the back and forth to be something that is helpful. I like this point from Mike. Tell him to save the troll opinions for the YouTube video comments. Helps with the algo. I like that. We also got a super chat. What's your favorite sports movie? Mine's Kingpin. Mine's probably Happy Gilmore. I don't know if you have one, Shawn. Oh, Major League's a good one.
I have to think about that.
Yeah, there's a lot of good ones that could go on that list. But a quarterback did go there, Shawn. Geno.
I've guessed wrong a couple times now on who was going to go on the turn. Partly because I think other people should not be burning picks on quarterbacks, even though I'm planning to do it for our team.
Yeah, I mean, Jalen Hurts, Geno, probably unnecessary. Lamar, Fields, also seemingly a little bit of an odd one. And a 13th round Jared Goff when you took Stroud ahead of Mahomes in the 6th. There's been some interesting QB2 decisions in this room. A lot of high. I mean, we have a Kyler Dak team, 7-10, which isn't like crazy, but most teams have 2 QBs at this point now, including
especially, within the context of what's happened subsequently, I feel very lucky that we got Caleb where we did. That could have easily not happened.
Yeah. Yep. The Josh Allen team has a Herbert. The drafter in the 2-hole did take the Jordan Love value because they continued to take some of these values and never took another quarterback. We'll presumably use Love's score this week, but we'll need a different quarterback for next week. So that's interesting to see where they go. Yeah, I completely agree with you. The Caleb Williams value at that point is fantastic. That's awesome. Oh, yeah. The other thing when someone was saying the comments, like the stream, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications. We're going to be going live basically after Sunday Night Football. It's going to be a little bit variable week to week. You'll want notifications on. What are we looking at here, Shawn? I mean, the quarterbacks that have not made it into the queue, like Aaron Rodgers and Deshaun Watson, are the fallers. We don't have a Garrett Wilson on this team. We do have Jerry Jeudy. But the Deshaun Watson for the vibes it's just bad for the vibes of the team.
Yeah. I got stuck with Aaron Rodgers as my QB1 on one team. I had one team where I risked it on this stuff. And after you risk the first wave, then you risk the second wave, then you risk the third wave. Right? People are going to keep taking quarterbacks. I better take one at some point. Do you want any of those guys?
I don't care. No, I would probably just take Bo Nix, but whatever. Yeah. Do you want Dalvin Cook? Let's take Dalvin Cook.
I think that Bo Nix for the final main event draft, with the plan to immediately cut him, it's the opposite of the Deshaun Watson play, where you're going into the season with your guy. You made your final non-kicker and defense pick on a fun player. Ben, I have been saying that I think that he's going to be a very good quarterback. I would encourage people, even if you're a Bo Nix fan, maybe especially if you're a Bo Nix fan, to just be patient and like the first turnover, the first pick six, the first sack. I don't think he's going to take many sacks. That's not been his MO. I do hope he'll actually push the ball a little bit. I think he can do that. It's going to be tactical as opposed to, every other pass. But, if he struggles these first couple of weeks, that is not going to tell us who he is, just in the same way that it's not going to tell us who Caleb Williams is, Jaden Daniels, Drake May when he gets out there, which should be very soon. Same thing with him. There's a chance that Bo Nix, though, will look very good right away. I keep hoping that some of that scrambling that we saw in the preseason will manifest in these first couple of games, that he might get a designed rushing touchdown. I think it's thin, but there's a scenario where Nix also adds enough with his legs to be more interesting than someone like an Aaron Rodgers, a Matthew Stafford, maybe a Kirk Cousins, although I kind of expect Cousins to light it up. That's one of the reasons we've been fairly high on Kyle Pitts. Yeah, if Bo Nix went for like 300, had 50 rushing yards, and had a rushing touchdown in week one, and we had selected Aaron Rodgers or someone who may not be active, we'd be disappointed.
So we just have our kicker and D left, Shawn. The Knicks, Mims, McLaughlin, Denver stack looking nice. So we finished with the Caleb Williams, Bo Nix QB room, Devon Achane, Kenneth Walker, Jaleel McLaughlin, Marshawn Lloyd, Tyrone Tracy are the running backs. Mentioned how the McLaughlin, Lloyd, Tracy profiles to me fit really well together. I really like that. We got both the Achane Walker, real ceiling cases on this one that I think is just so fun. Jefferson Reed, we get a lock-in Reed's 33-ish points for week one, but then a lot of speculative receivers, right? Rome Ladd, Jordan Addison, Jerry Jeudy, Marvin Mims, Jalen Tolbert. We get both Kittle and Bowers, so we can play Bowers right away in the flex. And then also grabbed Mike Gesicki to see what we might get out of him when we have T. Higgins out this week. And I think Jamar Chase still questionable at this point. No one really knows what is going on with Jamar Chase, but he practiced all week. My expectation is Chase is going to play, but there still should be a lot of available opportunity alongside that. Andre Yosivash went in the 12th round of this draft. He's going to be like the DFS chalk this week. A lot of expectation. He'll get some secondary looks. What if it's Mike Gesicki? People forget it's tight end premium. I mean, the thing I love about the Gesicki pick, though, truly is that with Higgins out, we'll know. If he doesn't do anything with Higgins out, you just cut him. You move on. If he has a nice role and does some stuff, if he catches 5-6 balls in tight end premium, that can be a 16, 18-point game pretty quickly, even without a TD. You're like, all right, well, maybe there's something here even when Higgins is in, So you want to give yourself an opportunity to see that. We got our kicker and defense picks to come, Shawn. It is always such a pleasure to draft these teams with you. Our final team nearly in the books. These are going to be our final picks of 2024 until the season kicks off tomorrow morning.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
My watch didn't get that. We are up. Who you liking? Brett? My favorite kicker, Braden Narvison, went in the 17th round. The Narv dog has risen since yesterday's showing, where he did hit the upright on one, but he
cost us 4 points with that.
It
was a weird angle too. It looked like it was floating right down the middle, and then suddenly upright.
Yeah, that was not great from the Narv dog, but he made 3 other field goals, 2 extra points. Solid game out of him. Who's our kicker and D going to be?
Well, it seems like the Bengals could struggle to score touchdowns tomorrow, but they might struggle to move the ball at all. They've got a kicker with a big leg. You had mentioned Cameron Dicker. That might be the way to go.
Okay. Yeah,
I see you mentioned it. That was on a previous team, but I'm keeping all of Ben's kicker recommendations.
I don't.
Back of the mind there.
I do remember like throwing him out there once. I don't have a strong Cameron Dicker take, but I also don't like hate it. They do have the lowest over-under in week 1. Them in the Raiders game is like 39.5. But maybe that means field goals, right?
Well, I was going to say you can come right back and take the Chargers defense because they are playing a team whose head coach described their outlook for the 2024 season as, look, we're probably not going to score a lot of points. Like, well, you've managed to set expectations. So Brock Bowers begs to differ. He's like,
yeah, I mean,
watch what I can do on a football field.
I actually took the over for that game at Stealing Lines. I would say that's the pick of my 7 for this week that I felt the least conviction about, but I did feel like there's a lot of scenarios where, like you just mentioned, Brock Bowers. I think Devonta Adams is still good. I think both of these teams, if they fall behind, will be aggressive enough because I think they're both very like prideful coaches and team. Like I think Antonio Pierce isn't going to just run the ball down 14 necessarily, and they have Gardner Minshew, which could just mean a pick 6. Like I think there will be points in this game. And Minshew will chuck it. He'll take his shots downfield. If he doesn't throw the picks, then they'll have an opportunity to score in some of those spots. Certainly the Chargers, I think if they fell behind, would get a little bit more aggressive with Herbert. So my point was just sort of that I think there are a lot of scenarios where like I understand the line. I understand why it's sub 40 because these are 2 teams that are going to play slow pace and probably run the ball like you were just talking about. But I also think that that's like very baked into this line and the scenarios where this game is a little bit weird and different than what we think is the most likely outcome are reasonable as well. And so anyway, I don't mind having Dicker here at all. I don't mind double tapping it with the D. I think that's immediately I'm like, all right, let's get that Gardner Minshew pick 6. Oh, the D just went. So we're not going to get that. But yeah, get the Gardner Minshew pick 6. You get an extra point on top of it. I mean, that's nice. He did go, though, or they did go. There are several defenses that have.
A lot of my go-to defenses have already been picked in this draft, however.
Yeah, they're all going.
A lot of the defenses I'm hoping to pick up tomorrow morning to replace Kansas City didn't score any points, which, we were kind of expecting, but that's the whole way you play it like that. You can get your secondary pick second.
Right. I got one. I just put one in the queue. Oh, you did the other side of that. That I'd be fine with either side of that. You had put the Giants in. I put the Vikings in. They play each other, and both their quarterbacks will turn the ball over. Maybe they'll go here because I actually like the one you have at the top of the queue best. So if the Chargers and Vikings go, then we can take the one at the top.
The reason, and this may be one of those things that actually isn't as important as targeting, just as you were mentioning, the quarterback play. The Giants are at home in that game.
Yeah. We could definitely do that. I just think O'Connell, like the Vikings are favored. O'Connell probably schemes some stuff up, but Darnold will mess up enough. I would probably take the Giants to win that. I didn't pick that game, but it's kind of odd that they're home underdogs to Sam Darnold in week 1. But that is an indication, I think, of the Kevin O'Connell effect, right? And what the expectations are for that offense versus for Daniel Jones. The Bucs do go. That was the top defense we had. I really liked that because our week 1 opponent in FFPC, you play the team next to you. So we're the 8 hole. We're going to play the 7 hole. They have Jane Daniels. The Bucs play Jane Daniels. We would have gotten some direct leverage on our opponent's starting quarterback. Kind of liked that, but it didn't pan out. Yeah, the reason the D's are all going, Shawn, is KC, Philadelphia, and Green Bay have all not been drafted because they all didn't score much in these take a peeks. They usually always are drafted by this point, so it pushes the other D's down. But we don't want to take them either because
we've also got 3 teams have taken 2 defenses.
Yeah, I don't know what's up with that.
Okay, so you are on the Minnesota side of this.
I know. No. I'm open. I'm very open. I
like that. Let's go that way.
Okay.
I'm going to be playing the Giants and some other ones maybe. But mostly I'm playing the Chicago Bears and occasionally the Atlanta Falcons. We know that we love Justin Fields. We know he will take some sacks, which is really the one thing that you're looking for here. And Ben, that's why we've been targeting the Buccaneers in all of these games. The concern that not concern exactly, but the fun little red flag for Jaden Daniels is that he is willing to let himself get hit. And if you've got a scrambling rookie in his first appearance, the chance that he makes some mistakes and also is willing to take some sacks, pretty high.
That's right. So our team is done.
I think I may even be playing him against myself because it doesn't really hurt you that much.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if he takes a bunch of sacks and throws some early picks, it might just put him in a situation where he has to make more plays late. Some of it can actually pan out. Yeah, that'll do it, Shawn. We took Cameron Dicker and the Vikings defense. I just read the team like twice, so I don't think I need to read the whole team again.
Anything you would change?
That's a good question. Like, what are the Devon Achane, Trey McBride pick at 2 was a big hinge point that we talked through and took all the way down to the wire, and you took Achane at the last minute. I kind of left it on your plate to 50-50 that. We get Walker in the 4th and like that pick, but we also get a great Kittle value in the 5th. And I like the way that it went. I like that we have Achane. And then we have Reed's points locked in on a kind of wide receiver light build. We take Bowers in the 6th. We were thinking about T there. Maybe, as much as I love Bowers, maybe the way that this all came together, T would have been interesting there. I would have loved to get JSN. I'd feel a lot better about this team if it had a legit number 3 in JSN compared to a pretty big, upside swing in a rookie. But I think Roman Nunes is very good. And I think there are some scenarios where he's really, really strong. But I mean, on the next round, you said that Ladd McConkey is going to outscore him this season. So there's obviously a wide range of how that could go.
One of the reasons I like Odunze, even though I think he is in a very difficult situation, is that I do think it still makes sense to take a little bit of that black box element, to take the extremely wide range of outcomes play. I'm a little bit more skeptical about the talent than most people, but that doesn't mean that I don't believe that when you have that production, you have that athleticism, the character seems fantastic. You put those things together that you couldn't have him. And one of the things, I don't think saying mispriced is maybe the right way to look at it, but it's interesting how large the gap has been between Odunze and Worthy versus Harrison and Neighbors, when you go through and you look at Harrison Neighbors, they are just extraordinary prospects. So, maybe that does make sense. But Odunze with that athleticism at that size, with the most recent production, one of the reasons I have very little DJ Moore, even though I think that he could be a very nice pick too, is it's not impossible that Odunze could immediately be the best of that trio. Having said that, this is only in retrospect because he comes back. But knowing that he didn't come back, I would prefer Jamison Williams in that pick. I mean, that's one of those things where when Rome Odunze goes for 150 tomorrow and Jamison Williams gets 3 touches, you're going to be like, well, that aged pretty poorly.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting context. I wouldn't, but I can see, I can see that thought for sure. I got a lot more excited about Jamison late as well. The McConkey and Addison picks work out really nicely in this. I don't think I would do them any different. We did have opportunities to do Keenan as well over Odunze, or Hopkins over Addison, Hollywood Brown maybe over McConkey. We just went with the younger, bigger swings, even though we didn't take a lot of receiver depth early. Maybe could be argued that we should have taken a Keenan Allen into this build. I don't think either of us thinks he really belongs in the 7th round or 8th round. But I don't know. Maybe he just.
I've got enough of him deep in 8 that I did think it was possible he would just free fall in this draft, and then you have interesting question of, do you want them both? And if they, especially then once you get Caleb Williams, maybe they both hit, maybe Caleb Williams is a top, 5 QB, that works, or simply one of them hits and you can play the better guy.
Right. We did that in a draft in Vegas. We did that. We did a Odunze and then took Keenan coming back and talked about how we really liked that. Like if Keenan's right, the scenarios where Odunze is not right, then Keenan's probably a hit in the 8th round at that point. And if
and potentially a huge one.
And potentially a huge one. And if Keenan isn't right, that dramatically opens up the path for Odunze. So it's kind of like you feel like I think you would maybe be one person who would say that there could be a scenario where if Keenan's not right, Odunze also isn't good enough. And there's some ways that they could both be misses in that regard. But in some respects, it feels like you're locking in one good play when you take those two together, which is super helpful at 1:30 Eastern time the day before the season starts to figure out this.
Well, and this is again probably just spinning a story, but I think Odunze is more compelling to me in a situation where you also have a rookie QB coming in than if it had been a case where you've got an established QB who has an established rapport with DJ Moore. Now, again, I think that is kind of baked into the price as well, where people are straightforwardly enthusiastic about that because they don't think that Moore has the same type of advantage he would otherwise have. But I think if you're a young guy in Caleb Williams and you've got another young guy, you feel that kinship, you've built up the rapport, which is one of the things that's been reported. And that's one of the reasons why I have moved to being very comfortable taking Odunze ahead of the guy who was the wide receiver 3 last year in Keenan Allen. The upside scenario is very compelling.
We took Jaleel McLaughlin after that while talking about Judy, and Judy went all the way down and back 14 picks and made it to us in the 11th. We took Caleb Williams in the 12th after that while talking about Marshawn Lloyd. I had floated Lloyd. He went down and back, and we got Lloyd in the 13th, which to me, Shawn, that is just crazy. The next 3 backs that went off were Justice Hill, Tank Bigsby, and Cam Akers. Again, this guy is a day 2 pick, and the starter didn't look great in the take-a-peek game necessarily. Like Josh Jacobs was okay, but I thought it was a very bullish outcome for Lloyd as far as him not being in there could be bullish. I thought Emmanuel Wilson looked pretty good. And you're like, this is pretty favorable. I was watching the game with our ship chasing buddies, and Pete was saying that as well. He was like, can you imagine what Lloyd's going to be able to do with this? Like he thought it was very bullish for Lloyd as well. Because there was some running room for Emmanuel Wilson in some of these spots.
I mean, they're going to create so much space. I'm just trying to keep my expectations in check and my mental health in check as it relates to the Jordan Love injury. I think this next month. But I think that Jaden Reed, kind of like as we were talking about at the very beginning, that you would have to take him ahead of Drake London. You would have to take him ahead of Marvin Harrison. You probably couldn't take him ahead of, Rashee Rice and Puka Nacua, certainly not ahead of AJ Brown. I mean, Jamar Chase is such a weird situation, but so we let it fall through there. We come and take him in 3. I do think it's a play for the initial points, and then a month from now, I'm scared of the next month with the Green Bay Packers, and that does extend to Marshawn Lloyd for me. But it may be a situation where, because it's so much more difficult, that they need a back with that dynamism even more than they would, where if their offense, we're just firing on all cylinders and mostly scoring at will, which isn't exactly what happened against the Eagles. They ran into some trouble at different points and made some mistakes. But if you're scoring super easily and you just given this contract to Josh Jacobs, maybe it's super easy. But, if they go out there and Josh Jacobs is averaging 2 yards a carry, which is within the range of what he's did last season, then that contrast plays up even more. And maybe it's a positive thing for like what their roles will be in week 8 and beyond, if you can see that if they need him in order to do anything in this next month.
Yeah, that makes sense. Shawn, I got a good question for you right now before we let these people go. If you had to pick right now who we would start in week 2, because we do get Reed's points in week 1, but one of the things, if we had taken like a Keenan Allen pick, is we might be thinking that we could sit Reed in week 2 because we'd be able to flex Bowers, but we don't really have a clear wide receiver 2 otherwise. Maybe it's Addison with Jefferson, Adunze or McConkey, or Jerry Jeudy, maybe Mims, Tolbert. Even if they had a huge week 1 role, you could tell yourself that they might even be in the discussion as a week 2 starter. I think McLaughlin will be in the flex discussion. Probably you still play Reed, I think, but I do think we probably agree that Malik Willis is going to be a pretty big issue for the Packers' overall pass volume and what that means for his range of outcomes. So what would your week 2 starting lineup be right now?
Yeah, so it's going to be obviously the top 6 without Reed. And then I think it's going to be Adunze, and then the other flex spot is Jordan Addison.
Is Addison. Okay. That makes sense. I was thinking maybe McLaughlin, but
one of the things I like about it, though, and again, just with 1 week, you're not going to be able to tell. It'd be very disappointing if out of Adunze, McConkey, Addison, and Jeudy, you don't have one performance that's extremely encouraging. That doesn't get you all the way to figuring out, how that lineup is going to work over the next month, but it takes some of the guesswork out to where you're not. It's
a super important point. And as you were talking about a little bit ago about like how some of the stuff we can sit and talk about here is potentially helpful for people as I think about next year, things like that. But I mean, one of the ways to say that is like you would have to be so unlucky or have such misses on all of those plays for none of them to have something meaningful in week 1, in which case, like, your team probably just sucks, man. Unfortunately, this team's not going to win, but we know that. Like, you can't play for floor outcomes where half your team is bad. And so then, I got to make sure I get some boring, whatever, Josh Palmer pick into this build or something so that I can get somebody that I know is going to be running routes next week, because I don't know if Adunze or McConkey or Addison will. That makes you miss on another opportunity somewhere else. You've already made this bet on one of these youngsters being good. And if they're all not good, then your team's just bad. Like, you have to, it's that idea of drafting, like, you're right, you have to do that to some extent. The idea that a parlay of Adunze, McConkey, Addison doesn't hit. And I've been talking about it like that's a little bit riskier than it is. But I was also talking about it in terms of like, but we had the choice to have something that was more of a sure thing. And we didn't want that at Keenan Allen or at DeAndre Hopkins or at Hollywood Brown or whatever. They would make you feel more secure. And we were okay doing multiple uncertain things, these wide band plays you were talking about that have extreme upside scenarios, that do have extreme downside scenarios as well. But when you make multiple bets of that archetype, the likelihood that they're all going to be bad is pretty limited. That's a parlay. You start to think about, like, I'm using that word very specifically because you start to think about the way odds stack up when you do parlays and sports betting, right? Like, you get, additional odds for trying to hit all of those things at once. Or you can just think about it as a whatever. a probability thing. If you need 350% outcomes to happen, that's 12.5%, 50%, 25%, 12.5%. You multiply those percentages by themselves, whatever. Like if you want to think about it statistically, that's, another way to think about it. But the point is, if you wanted to flip a coin and say they all need to come up heads, say heads is the bad outcome for us, it's probably not a 50-50 deal, to be clear. But if they all have to come up heads, because if they all come up tails, that means we have 3 good players. So they all have to come up heads. That's a 12.5% outcome on 3 flips to get them all to be heads. That's 88% of the time. You're getting at least 1 tail in there, right? Like that's sort of the idea.
And I think the other thing is to think about it from both the early season and then from the midseason and then from the late season, where as the season progresses, there's a decreasing chance for Odunze and McConkey to be bad picks as well. I don't even think that Jordan Addison is a risky pick, other than you could have an apocalyptic performance that stretches on from Sam Darnold.
Yeah.
I mean, otherwise, there's nothing risky about someone who was a fantastic college receiver drafted in the first round that scores 200 points as a rookie. There's just nothing risky about that at all.
Basically, the Jaden Reed play, like you said when we took him.
So, I mean, and again, it's not saying ever that it's 100% that Addison is going to hit, but I would say he's one of the least risky plays between like the end of round 6 and round 12. What happened? Obviously, they should get a little bit riskier as you go beyond him. If you miss that, then you're mostly unlucky because that's an ADP that's just completely and totally broken. I mean, removed from the injury report. The other part with it is that you could lose a big chunk of the season, and that's one of the reasons why we are trying to make sure we draft with enough upside, deep enough. That you talk about how if we take the lower upside picks early, it doesn't even necessarily help us early in the way that it would appear, but it really hurts us as the season goes along, because if you think that you're going to lose Addison for a month at some point, maybe during the fantasy playoffs, maybe during the race, it's even more important that if you're in the mix there, that you have players like Odunze and McConkey who could still carry you to the title, as opposed to, guys that you can just put in the roster, but now you can't compete with the other super teams.
That makes sense. Vincent here said only 7 likes on the video as well. I think you need to refresh. I'm seeing more than that, but I'm still not seeing anywhere near the 162 people watching. You guys need to all go hit like on the video, subscribe, turn on notifications. Make sure you are knowing when we're going live. We're going to go live tomorrow again. We'll be back, Shawn, to talk about everything we see in week 1. I'm really excited. I also need to go get some sleep after a couple days in Vegas. So we are going to have to power it down a little bit, but week 1 is always so much fun, Shawn. We get so many things that are going to happen. Maybe we could give a couple that we're most excited about for tomorrow. I'm pulling up the schedule right now. Caleb Williams is one of them, and Chicago's offense, and then Stroud and Houston's offense, those 2 offenses that went out and prioritized getting 3 deep at receiver. So they have so much with potentially legit star receivers. They have so many mismatches on every snap that you're going to have somebody win somewhere. Houston at Indianapolis tomorrow is going to be really fun. Both those teams will play with pace. I have some concerns about Anthony Richardson, but Steichen will scheme some stuff up. They'll play fast. They'll play aggressive. That's got a really high over-under. I think that could be a shootout and be a really fun one. Anything that immediately pops into your head as you think about what you're looking forward to tomorrow? Oh, Bo Nix in Seattle. That'll be fun.
Yeah. If that game could shoot out, it would just make probably my whole year.
Yeah.
If the teams look competent, that would get pretty close for me there. I'm excited specifically on the player front. And I want to be patient with this too. This is one where if you're wrong in week 1, it'll be disappointing, but don't necessarily think you're going to be wrong the whole way. I want to see how healthy Kyle Pitts and Brock Bowers look. I want to see if the new offense and Kirk Cousins unlocks Kyle Pitts. And it doesn't have to be something like 10 catches for 170 yards and 2 touchdowns. Does it look like he's going, back in the direction that he had established as a young player? Does Brock Bowers get open at will and then run after the catch like he did in college, like he supposedly was doing in camp before the injury? Those two, from a game perspective, I'm coming to you from Tucson, and we're going to have Marvin Harrison, somebody whose ADP I've been skeptical of, but who is an insanely exciting wide receiver prospect. Going to be out there with Trey McBride, going to be out there with James Conner, who that one, you're like, why would we're talking about excitement? Why are we mentioning James Conner? Like the best peripherals in the NFL last year. That doesn't seem like it could have been the case, but SIS has him looking really, really good. Kyler Murray, those guys traveling, and you get a little bit of that issue potentially with the travel for a West Coast team. We're not on the coast, but we're in Pacific time right now, playing the new look Buffalo Bills. What's that offense going to be like now that they got rid of the receivers? Are you going to get those 3 receivers who are being drafted? And again, for me, I think that it's a low ceiling play across the board. And so it's not a play I've been making. I can certainly understand drafters who are saying, you're thinking about it wrong. It fits into what you're always talking about. You just have to tweak the way you look at it a little bit. One of those guys is going to hit, and the guy who hits is going to be a big deal. We may find that out tomorrow. Hopefully for you and me, it's Dalton Kincaid who ends up being the guy who hits. That game right there, I hope the Cardinals can stick in it. I think that they should. That should be an unbelievable football game.
I love where you went with it was to the tight ends. The Kyle Pitts point, yes. Against Arthur Smith, it would just be so fun if the usage was great and he was so good and got to show off his talent, because Arthur Smith is coming to town with Pittsburgh. And then Arizona at Buffalo, we get Trey McBride versus Dalton Kincaid, Sean. If there's not 20 tight end catches in that game, I'm going to be upset. I need all the tight end usage we could possibly get out of that game. And I'm not talking about for Dawson Knox. I'm talking about for the 2 guys that we actually want to catch the ball. That is going to be another fun one. It is so freaking cool to look at the schedule and see what games are going to be on. 8 games in the morning or the early window, those of you on the East Coast. Obviously, it's the afternoon for you guys. 4 in the late window. Sunday Night Football is the Rams at the Lions. That'll be really fun. That's got the highest over-under of the week, 52.5. Shootout season in Detroit. Jared Goff versus Matthew Stafford, traded for each other years ago. That's Sunday Night Football. Monday Night Football is New York at San Fran. You get Aaron Rodgers back in the Bay Area, where he obviously played college ball for Cal. That should be a fun game. 2 good defenses, but obviously 2 good offenses as well. A lot of talent there. You have freaking Christian McCaffrey and Breece Hall going at it on Monday Night Football. Garrett Wilson, got Ayuk and Debo and Kittle. And it's just so fun to sit and be like, these are all the players we're going to get to see in a real game. I would take any one of those games as just like the one game. Like the last 2 nights have been so fun on Thursday and Friday. We're going to get all that on Sunday and then the one on Monday. We're back.
And this may be something, when we did do the show with it, it may be a little bit more niche for some of our audience. You have been partying and traveling. I don't know if you're keeping all of the lineups in your head. With T. Higgins not playing, we're going to get chopped. That Monday Night Football game is going to be huge for us making it out of the very first week.
We did the guillotine draft. We have T. Higgins in that?
We have T. Higgins, which means we're basically playing a lineup spot down. We now have Jawan Johnson, our second tight end, in our week 1 lineup. We're in huge danger of getting chopped.
Oh, my God. This is hilarious. Aaron Rodgers, James Cook, Aaron Jones, Cooper Kupp, Garrett Wilson, Tyjae Spears, Jawan Johnson, Cole Kmet. That's a terrible lineup for week 1.
Now, again, just context for anybody who missed. This is 18-team league. But it's not great.
Shawn, we did take, because we took Jonathan Brooks and Hollywood Brown to sort of stash because we had our starting lineup filled, and then T. Higgins isn't playing. So now we have this huge hole. We did take Justin Fields, who might be the play over Aaron Rodgers in San Francisco if Russ sits. What do you think about that?
I mean, anything to get some more points.
Literally anything will do.
And just to go back in time and have 0% of T. Higgins, who it's been a frustrating ride with him the last couple of years. It's not getting better in week 1.
Yeah, that's tough. That's not what we want to see from him. All right. We did it. We got to the end of the stream. I don't know what meant that we were at the end other than I'm tired and I want to go to sleep. Shawn, it has been a blast chatting with you all summer. To all the listeners, thank you so much for listening throughout the summer. We'll obviously have all the in-season content coming as well, but it's such a blast. Thank you to everybody who hung out tonight on the live stream. Yeah, man, Stealing Bananas. We'll be back on Sunday night to talk through everything from week 1. Such a joy that we get to do this. But for now, we are going to sign off. This has been Stealing Bananas. Later.